Show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Everybody, on this January 10th, welcome to the Yaron Book Show, where we're doing a news briefing. This is episode 15, and thank you all for being here. Of course, you can call in with questions, 347-324-3075, press 1, so that I know you want to ask a question, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. All right, I want to start with the story we might go international first 3 stories, and then come back domestic. I want to go to Germany for the first story, or really to Europe generally, and to a new law that I think passed in Germany. I'm not sure if this have wider European implications, but certainly this is a law in Germany. And the law in Germany basically says that social media networks are now responsible for the content published on their websites. So it's not just the person who posts that's responsible for libel or for hate speech. We'll get to hate speech in a minute, or for incitement for violence or anything like that. It's the actual social media company is responsible for, and it's their job to actually delete offensive, violent, potentially libel content from the website, right? So this is the equivalent. I mean, imagine this is like 100 times worse than what's going on in the United States with YouTube and all of those, where YouTube is basically saying some content I can't sell advertising for. I think that's a completely reasonable argument to make, and therefore we're just not making it available for advertising. That's a lot of the big deal that's happening. It's Prager's dispute with YouTube. YouTube's claiming we can't sell advertising. This is offensive to advertising. Advertisers have always withdrawn from a variety of different shows. I mean, that's the cost for being controversial. People are not going to want to advertise with you. But in Germany, it's much more than that. Now it's the job of Facebook and Twitter to decide what is controversial, or what is considered hate speech, or what is slander, or what is incitement, and to take it off their websites actively. And they're engaging thousands of people to review these things. Germany has today 16% of all the Facebook content monitors, even though it only has 1.5% of Facebook users, are actually based in Germany. So you get this massive number of people who are reading stuff. Now, their software, it's a complicated process that these companies have adopted in order to try to figure out what should be deleted, what shouldn't. It turns out that if some content is questionable, then you bring in the legal team. Now, imagine how much money Facebook and Twitter have had to spend on their legal teams. Now, this is all in the law. This is not Facebook and Twitter doing it because they think this is right. This is because the law forces them to do it. If they don't, they can be fined 50 million euro, $60 million for illegal content. Now, I assume that is a sum that they could be actually charged for every single violation. So imagine the million of posts that go on, and they have to monitor them all and take off what's considered offensive. I mean, I think if they had any kind of integrity, these companies would just leave Germany. I mean, this is absurd. This is ridiculous. A massive violation of free speech. Massive violation of free speech. As I said, they have 1,200 moderators in Germany, plus the software, plus millions of dollars put into this. The code, the legal code that defines what is considered unacceptable for the purposes of social media is 24 paragraphs long. So they have to review everything in the context of these 24 paragraphs. Does this go beyond the pale, or doesn't it go beyond the pale? So it's just imagine what that kind of that involves, right? Now, of course, they've already got in trouble. They've suspended an account of a German satire magazine because everything they were tweeting is satire and therefore offensive. And then what do you do? And then they brought in the lawyers, and the lawyers said, no, we shouldn't delete their account. We should just ban certain tweets. But which tweets? Some tweets, not other tweets. And by the way, this satire magazine was a leftist satire magazine, making fun of the right, and they were banned. So this is not left or right. It's across the board. It's a completely nutty. And Europe, in this sense, is way, way ahead of the United States in terms of banning free speech. I mean, the whole idea of hate speech is coded into the legislature in most European countries, including particularly in Germany, but really all over Europe, including in the European Union. So hate speech is a violation. So, for example, you don't need Muslim terrorists to come in and silence people. Now it's the governments to do it. Charlie Hebdo was being attacked by the French government for its content well before those evil, horrific monsters, jihadis who went in and killed the cartoonists in Charlie Hebdo. What was it, 2.5 years ago? No, it's exactly 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. And so you don't need that. The government's doing the job for them. You don't need Muslim terrorists. Just wait, Muslims. Don't rush. Every time you commit these acts of violence, people actually rally a little bit against you. No, stay peaceful and let Europe kill itself. And then you can just walk in. Why stress over this stuff? Europe is committing suicide. This is not going to be hard for you. You're going to be able to take over, as a cakewalk, you're going to be able to take over Europe. It really is pathetic. So this is a government law. This is very different than Twitter or Facebook deciding as private companies that there's certain content they do not want to post. They have every right in the world to do that. Every right in the world. And one of the most horrific phenomena that I find in the world right now is that both left and right are joined in attacking Facebook and Twitter and wanting and Amazon and Apple and Google and wanting to break them up and split them up. The coalition of if you will, radical, out there left, crazy left, and crazy right. Well, not so crazy right. Some real, just mainstream conservatives now are advocating for breaking up the big social media companies. So that is scary when the government starts intervening because it doesn't like the way businesses are managing their business. But Google and Twitter have every right to decide what content goes on their platform. But for the government to mandate it, that is a massive violation of rights. But what's interesting is basically, and somebody mentions this, one of the critics of this law mentioned it, what we have here is the government delegating its responsibility to follow the law, to enforce the law, to business. Now, I think that's horrific. It's the job of the government to catch the bad guys, not the job of business. It's not the job of business to monitor their customers. Now, in the U.S., we have tons of this. Banks that are supposed to monitor you if you take out more than $10,000 in cash because you might be a terrorist, or you might be a smuggler, or you might be a drug lord, or you might be something, and they're supposed to report it to the government, and they're supposed to fill out a form. So, banks. This is part of the post 9/11 laws, where banks are supposed to monitor their customers for suspicious behavior. That's not the job of banks. That's the job of government. The one job of government is to catch terrorists and crooks. Now, might not like the drug laws, but it's a job of government to catch the people who violate them, all right? Then do it, but don't ask the banks to do it for you. And here's a controversial one, which, you guys might have liked my example so far, but I'm not sure about this one. I think this whole idea that employers should be verifying whether the people they're employing are, quote, legal or illegally in this country is the same phenomena. It's not the job of business to enforce the law. It is the job of government. If you can't stop illegal immigrants from coming into this country, if you can't round them up and catch them, if that's what the law says, then it's not the job of employers to do your job for you. Now notice that this is always in the context of violation of rights, when the government can't enforce the law because it's got its hands full. It's impossible to enforce the law. The drug laws are impossible to enforce. That's why the government continuously losing the so-called war on drugs. Immigration laws are impossible because they're irrational today. Impossible to enforce, so they need employers to enforce them. And of course, hate speech laws are impossible to enforce consistently and thoroughly, so you have to have employers do it for you. A good sign of an irrational law is when the government cannot enforce it and therefore delegates or assigns the responsibility for enforcing it onto private citizens. All right, so this is just horrific, but this is a steady march in Europe away from free speech. And you know what started it? I don't know how much of you know the history, but the first attacks on free speech, at least in the more modern era, were after World War II in Germany, where it was banned. It became illegal to be a Nazi. It became illegal to be a Holocaust denier. You could go to jail for advocating Nazi ideology and go to jail for being a Holocaust denier. Now, I think Holocaust denying is horrific, awful, immoral, disgusting. But you cannot make it illegal. People have a right to be irrational. People have a right to say stupid things. People have a right to sell fantasy in books. It's not the job of government. It's not the job of government to decide what truth is. And this is not right or left. I mean, in Germany, it's the right that has ruled most in recent times. The right has dominated German politics, the right of center, if you will. And yet, they're the ones advocating for this. This law was passed by Merkel's government. So it is truly, once you restrict free speech, for example, for Nazis, or restrict free speech for Holocaust deniers, who we all hate, that's cool. All right, who cares about Nazis? Who cares about Holocaust deniers? Once you restrict free speech for them, forget it. Forget it. Slippery slopes do indeed exist. Once you violate a principle, you will continue to violate it slowly and systematically until there is no free speech at all. At all. So, this is the direction Europe's heading. So today, it's illegal in Germany to offend the radical right, which is what the satirical magazine was doing. It's illegal in Germany to offend Muslims. It's illegal in Germany to offend radical, the extreme left or the extreme. I need a different word. I don't like extreme, and I don't like radical. I don't know. The real leftists and the real rightists, you can't offend either one of them. It's illegal. You really can't offend anybody. And it really becomes a situation where the government gets to decide when and how much to enforce, who to put in jail, who not to put in jail, what words are okay, what words are not okay. And look, free speech is a core idea that protects all of our rights, because it protects our right to think. It protects our right to think, to use our minds. Because speaking, writing, communicating is just an expression of our thinking. Once you lose your right to think, you lose all your rights. All your rights come ultimately from your right to use your mind. So free speech is a core principle of freedom. When you lose free speech, you lose. You're well on the way to losing your freedoms. And Europe and Germany, again, Muslims, don't bother with the terrorism. These guys are committing suicide without you. Right? Without you. By the way, it's never illegal to offend objectivists. You can offend objectivists. You can write horrible things about Ayn Rand. That's fine. Even snowflakes accept the fact that it's okay to offend people who agree with Ayn Rand, right? Left and right unite about that principle. You just can't offend people who are weak, people who are weaker than you. All right, so that's news from Germany and Twitter. If I were Twitter and Facebook, I would leave. I mean, Facebook is not in China already because the Chinese have banned them. They still survive, largest market in the world. They can afford, just since only 1.2% of their customers are in Germany, just leave. Just leave. Let the Germans, let them cope with this. Let a German social media cope with this. I wouldn't hire all these people for this purpose. You're sanctioning a massive violation of free speech. You're becoming the instrument of it. You're becoming the enforcer of it. It's just horrible, right? The government has passed a law that's immoral and wrong and doesn't make and anti-rights, and they're asking you to enforce it. Stop. Don't do it. Don't do it. All right. That is Google. And that is state of the world in Germany and the importance of free speech. All right. Next place in the world, we're doing a little geography thing. We're hopping around different countries in the world and picking up some important news stories from each one of these places. The next story is from South Africa. Now, somebody sent me this article. Thomas Pikety, probably the most famous economist in the world right now, a liberal economist from the pantheon of liberal economists, alongside the likes of Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman, one of the greats, a Nobel Prize winner to be. An economist who travels the world and the red carpet is brought out. Presidents come and shake his hand. A real celebrity, a real rock star. And he is, of course, the author of what I like to call Das Kapital in the 21st century. That is an update of Karl Marx's Kapital for the 21st century. I mean, it's insulting to Marx to say that because it's so... Marx is... How do I put it? Marx is inventive. It's thoughtful is the wrong word, but it's trying to be deep and philosophical. It's somewhat breaking new ground. It's trying to establish principles and ideas. And Pikety is a superficial Marxist with lots of data that he loves to run. Lots of data to prove that his superficial ideas are right. And of course, the data, of course, doesn't do that. And his superficial ideas are bogus, completely 100% bogus. Anyway, Pikety was in South Africa. Now, let me give you a quick history of South Africa. Quick history of South Africa, so you get a sense of the place. Until the early 90s, South Africa had apartheid, and apartheid was a racist regime that treated blacks as third, fourth-class citizens. Not quite slaves, but almost. Right? They couldn't vote. In many areas in South Africa, they couldn't own land. So, for example, Thomas Pikety spoke in a neighborhood called Soweto. Soweto is a massive slum in South Africa. And, of course, people came there from rural South Africa, from what we'll call the tribal lands, came to work, but they weren't allowed to own property there. So the assumption is they would go back to the rural one day, they would come do their work, and of course they settled in this place near Johannesburg. And millions of them, I think millions of them, settled there. And they were treated like crap. They couldn't own their own land, and there were certain professions that they were excluded from. Of course, all the signs of racism. They couldn't drink from the same water fountains, and they couldn't go to the same beaches, and they couldn't be in the same neighborhoods. I mean, if you want a truly vulgar, ugly, horrible, immoral, society, apartheid South Africa was exactly that. Truly disgusting, and what the white supremacists dream of America one day becoming, I guess. But it was disgusting. I was there a number of times. I still have family in South Africa. I was there during those years, and even a young me was disgusted by what I saw, how the whites treated the blacks, and the very separation and the way it was separated. Anyway, apartheid fell, and it fell peacefully, and democracy was established, and a black party, the ANC, gained political power. If you remember, Nelson Mandela was the head of it, and everybody expected a lot of violence when that happened, violence that never actually occurred, not on the scale that people expected it. But what has really happened since is you've got a very corrupt, very inefficient, very statist, borderline socialist government run by corrupt politicians running South Africa. And as a consequence of that, some people have gotten very rich. Those people close to power, those people who are real cronies, have gotten very rich. And the rest of the population, has improved a little bit. I can't say that they're just as bad, just as poor as they were 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But they're not much better off. Their success has been very limited, and to a large extent, that's a consequence of the fact that entrepreneurship, is very limited. Regulations, controls, and primarily corruption dominates South African politics. Cronyism, corruption, and so on. So Thomas Pikety has come, and of course, as a consequence of that, one of the consequences of that is vast inequality, right? More inequality than in Brazil, more inequality than in the U.S., in the sense that, here's one statistic, 60 to 65 of South Africa's wealth is South Africa's wealth, as if South Africa has any wealth. Of the cumulative wealth of the individuals in South Africa is concentrated in the hands of just 10% of the population. A comparable number in Brazil would be 50-55. In the U.S., it's less than half. It's more like 40%. So now most of those, 60, 65, 80% of them are white. Now that's also part of the thing. Part of how the whites have stayed rich is that they have become part of this cronyism corruption scheme. They pay off the government to stay off. A lot of these companies maintain real monopolies that are protected by government, where they are bribing the government in order to sustain those monopolies. So it's not a government-created inequality. It's an inequality that is created by cronyism and by favors and by corruption. Now, I've said many times, inequality in and of itself doesn't matter. But what has happened is the poor in South Africa have benefited very little from whatever economic progress South Africa has made over the last 30 years. And there have been years in which the economy in South Africa has grown quite a bit. Quite a bit. So here comes Pikety, and what is the advice he gives them? Now, he says, you've got real problems here, and what is the solution? Well, of course, Pikety's solution is more government. Pikety's solution is to give more power to the government. Pikety's solution is a minimum wage. There's not enough unemployment in Soweto. Let's increase unemployment. Let's have a national minimum wage. And then he wants much more employee participation in companies. That's good. He's a good socialist. And finally, what we really need in South Africa is land reform. Now, land reform is a tricky concept because I'm in support of land reform. All the land that the squatters in Soweto, which was originally government land, should be handed to them. Government should have no land. And if you're using that land, it should be yours. So I'm all for land reform if it means increasing private ownership of land in South Africa. But I suspect that is not what is meant. What is meant is the confiscation of the rich land that rich people own and giving it to the poor. Now, that particular experiment has been tried before in a country very close to South Africa, just on its northern border, today called Zimbabwe, in the very old days called Rhodesia. Zimbabwe had the same phenomena as South Africa, just later. No, I think it was actually earlier. In Zimbabwe, when the authoritarianism of the white population was overturned and everybody had supposedly equal political rights, what happened was that the black population turned against the whites, against wealth owners, against landowners, confiscated their farms, confiscated their property, redistributed it. And as a consequence, Zimbabwe went from being one of the richest countries in Africa, maybe the richest country in Africa, certainly the breadbasket of Africa, a country known for its rich agriculture, for its capacity to export massive quantities of food. And it became one of the poorest countries where people were starving, where people started fighting with one another physically, arming one another against one another just to fight for food. A country that had so much inflation that they had $100 trillion notes and ultimately had to shut down their central bank and basically dollarize or turn their currency over to the South Africans, basically. And here he is, Pikety, advocating. I'm sure he would say I was wrong. I'm sure he'd say, no. My land reform would be a lot more reasonable. I'm French, after all. I'm much more reasonable than the land reform that was done in Zimbabwe. No. You have to do it right. If you're going to confiscate people's territory, if you're going to be a thief, if you're going to steal, if you're going to redistribute wealth on a large scale, you have to do it with some panache. You have to do it with some style. You have to do it the way the French would do it. By the way, when the French did it in Africa, they basically slaughtered everybody. No. Those Africans, they don't know. They don't understand. So Zimbabwe's right there. And it doesn't matter. And then, of course, he says that they should increase income taxes and have an annual wealth tax and all this stuff. Right? Now, what's fascinating, of course, and this is always the case, that who is making this possible? Who is making this possible? Who invited Thomas Pikety, the famous economist, to give a speech in Soweto about inequality in South Africa? Was it the ruling party? No. Was it the poor who are concerned about this inequality? No. Who was it? It was the rich. It was Coca-Cola. It was Audi. It was Anglo Gold Ashanti, a big gold mine. It was Vaticum. It was Rupert and the Ruperts and the Rothschilds. And it was the billionaires. Stein, who, is a huge real estate developer, billionaire in South Africa. It's the billionaires who invited him. This is what Ayn Rand called the sanction of the victim. It's the billionaires who feel guilty for their wealth, or if they don't feel guilty, know they should feel guilty. And if they don't know they should feel guilty, at least they know they should be trying to appease the masses by embracing the masses as so-called favorite economist. Right? I'm sure, by the way, Thomas Pikety probably got $250,000 for that speech, which I'm sure, given that he's French, he's giving all that money to charity. That was a joke. Thomas Pikety wouldn't give any money to charity. He doesn't care if income inequality goes up because he just took $250,000 for a speech. Indeed, he would celebrate that because he, as a French intellectual, deserves to be rich versus these greedy bastard capitalists who make stuff and build stuff and produce stuff. They don't deserve it. It's the intellectuals who deserve the real money. I actually should support Pikety. Hey, I can't charge $250,000. I should be a lefty. If I was a lefty, I would make a lot more. I'm a good speaker. I could make a lot more money. I could take Pikety stuff and make it sound better than Thomas Pikety. I could easily get $250,000. Hey, that's my career move. I'm going to become a lefty and go on the circuit as a lefty speaker. Anyway, and in the article that I read, they're asking, did this who's who of South African monopoly capital, they're not monopolists, but it doesn't matter, know that they were funding the man who has called for vastly increased income taxes and annual wealth taxes? Did they understand that in Pikety's narrative, they are the bad guys? Of course they understood. Of course they understood. They make Pikety possible. I would like just a few of these billionaires to stand up and say, Pikety, you are the problem. Pikety, you are evil. Pikety, you are destroying the world economy. Because it's economists like Pikety who are making poor people poorer, who encourage cronyism and the fraud and the everything that exists in the world today, that want government to control everything and therefore create a complete crony environment. Of course, the article goes on and says, maybe the sponsors realize that in plastering their brand all over Pikety's message, they were simultaneously undermining it. Now, this gives too much credibility to these guys. Their logos told the audience that even capitalism's most respected discontents have been assimilated into and benefit from the very companies and multinationals that they rail against. That's true. But people don't understand that at the end of the day, the power is not with money. The power is not with the billionaires. The power is not with the business leaders. The power is not even with the politicians. The real power, the power to change the world, the power to influence history and to determine history, is in the minds of the intellectuals. It's in Pikety. Pikety is more dangerous, more influential, more capable of changing and impacting the world for the worse than any politician, any single politician, than any single billionaire is. Because it's ideas that shape the world. And his lousy, horrible ideas they've changed the debate completely. Today, everybody constantly talks about the evils of inequality, and everything is shaped around the debate around inequality. It's not the billionaires who are winning this. It's Pikety. All right, so that's a little briefing from South Africa. What South Africa needs, what we all need, what South Africa needs desperately, is economic freedom. There is some extent political freedom in South Africa. To some extent, there's political equality of rights, finally, in South Africa. Apartheid is history, although I'm sure there are still some pretty evil remnants of it out there. But the laws and everything apply, I think, for the most part, equally to blacks and whites. There is too much affirmative action. There's too much reverse racism in South Africa, and that is hurting progress. But the real enemy is statism. There's too much government intervention, too much government control. Same thing in Germany, same thing in South Africa, same thing in the United States of America. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. But we will be back. I'll take your calls when I come back. So if you want to ask a call, press 1. There are 3 of you who've called in. If you want to not just listen, but also ask a question, press 1, and I can see then that you're asking a question. 1 on your keypad. If you don't want to ask a question, that's fine. If any of you want to ask questions, 347-324-3075, 347-324-3075. If you don't want to ask questions, that's fine. I've got plenty to talk about, and we're going to come back after this short break.
2017 marks the 60th anniversary of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. 12 years in the writing, it is Ayn Rand's masterwork. Despite being published 6 decades ago, the novel continues to gain recognition and profoundly influence business leaders, thought leaders, and a growing number of political leaders. Its presence in today's culture cannot be denied. The fascination with Atlas Shrugged persists because it grapples with the fundamental questions of human existence and presents radically new answers. Whether you're an adoring fan who wants to add this new addition to your personal library, or someone who wants to read the book for the first time to see what all the fuss is about, pick up your copy of Atlas Shrugged today. An updated cover for the mass market edition of the novel recently hit stores. Check it out. You can order your copy today on Amazon.
Yeah, go read Atlas Shrugged, guys. All right, we've got our first caller. Hi, you're on the Yaron Book Show. Who's this?
This is Neil.
Hey, Neil. What's up?
I wanted to ask a few questions, and this happens to be about race and class, how it affects people.
Sure.
Does race and class affect how successful you are?
Sure.
And I know you've done like one on class, but I just wanted to know what do you think about race? Does it affect how successful people are?
Well, I think it affects how successful people are to the extent that there's racism in the culture, to the extent that people judge you based on the color of your skin. So if there is systemic racism in the culture, then let's say if you're black and there is this racism, then that's going to inhibit your ability to be successful. That's going to constrain you. Now, whether there is systemic racism in America today is, I think, still an open question. I definitely think there is racism in America today. I've witnessed it. I've seen it.
Absolutely.
What's that?
I said absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there is racism in America today. So to some extent, that makes it more difficult for a black person to be successful, certainly in certain parts of the United States. Now, it doesn't make it impossible for them to be successful. If they live in a racist environment, they can move. I'm a big advocate of picking up your stuff and going where life is better. In some ways, they have advantages. So to get into college, for example, it's easier today for a black student because there's reverse discrimination. So there are quotas which allow blacks to go into college. So there are no excuses in that realm. And there are plenty of employers that are not racist. So while I think it's harder, it doesn't exclude the ability to do it. And it's still your personal responsibility. And the fact is that in a free country, people have a right to be racist. It's immoral, it's disgusting, but they have a right to do it. And you don't have a right to force them not to be or force them to behave as if they're not. So it's your responsibility to take your life seriously enough to do the things necessary to minimize the impact of racism on you. And I know it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's life. Life is not some kind of guarantee that everything is going to be easy. It's not. It's the opposite. It's everything. Somebody said once, everything that's worthwhile is hard. There's a truth to that. Worthwhile things require real effort. Otherwise, that's what values are about. And yeah, they have to consume more effort. And I think to the extent that there's racism in America, we should be talking about it. We should be bringing it up. We should be condemning the people who are engaged in it. And by the way, I think the racism goes in both directions. I think blacks are racist towards whites as well. But any kind of racism should be condemned completely. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. And also, Yaron, I have another question for you. This was this is when I was having a debate with a Black Panther, and he called Donald Trump a white supremacist, and I just want to know the things that he says and the things that he does, would that classify him as a white supremacist, or just like someone who's just trolling people?
Well, I don't even know what trolling means anymore. You know, what does trolling mean? Tell me what you consider trolling.
Just trolling is like just saying stuff to elicit a response from people.
Yeah, so I think trolling is horrible. I think trolling is disgusting. To do stuff just to elicit other people's anger, other people's response is not rational. It's not good. So let me just condemn trolling. I find trolling offensive and ridiculous and disgusting. And if the president of the United States is trolling, that should be a disqualification for the job. That should be enough to impeach him, if that's what trolling means. But is Donald Trump a white supremacist? I don't think he's a white supremacist. I think a lot of it is shock value. But what he is he is not a condemner of white supremacists. I think he's an enabler. I think he's somebody that will look the other way when white supremacists have their way. And you saw that with what happened in Charlottesville. So I don't think he is a white supremacist necessarily. I don't know, but I don't think he is. But I don't think he thinks twice about it. I think if he thinks that appeasing some white supremacists will gain him votes, I think he would do it. I don't think he has any moral qualms about issues like this. I don't think he's a thinker. I don't think Trump is a thinker. I mean, I think he's an emotionalist, and I think that he is, I think he's a nothing, and he is but I think he is an enabler of white supremacists. I don't think there's any question. There's no question that they have felt emboldened by his presidency. And one of the things that I think is great about Bannon's fall from grace is that Bannon was an active enabler of white supremacists. An active enabler of white supremacists. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I agree. It does.
Good.
I mean, especially since he's on the alt-right, and since I'm a I'm not like a white supremacist. I don't like any of that stuff.
Good.
And I've been around them my whole life.
You have.
Anyways, thank you, Yaron.
How come you've been around them though your whole life? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I've lived in Orange County, California for the longest time, and a lot of people will say, oh, it's the most California's the most liberal place ever. But in my general area, not so much, because what I've discovered is that most people will advertise and just say this place like my area is liberal, but really most people in here are pretty much on the far right. Like when I went to school, since I'm Indian,
yep.
A lot of people when I went to school just called me names.
Yep.
And this,
yep.
I mean, they made fun of me and said I was the son of Osama bin Laden. Should have like stuff like that.
No,
honestly,
yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I think that racism is all over, and Indians suffer it in addition to blacks, and there's anti-Semitism out there. I think we have far too benevolent a view of Americans in terms of their racism. I think it's out there, and I think it's much more prevalent than most people think. And I think it has to be condemned in the harshest, and I think that is the job of the President of the United States. It's to condemn it unequivocally. Well, thank you for calling. Really appreciate it, and great questions, and thanks for bringing that to the forefront. It's an important issue to be discussing. Hi, we're going to the second questioner. You're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, this is Ethan McGonigal. Hi, Yaron. I'm a big fan of your show.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a high schooler, and
Great.
So around I'm a junior, and I live in Houston, Texas, and so it's relatively conservative area. But at my age, there just aren't that many people who are willing to discuss like politics, economics. That's just not something that many high schoolers like to talk about. It's something that I'm interested in, but I guess some people might call me a nerd.
It's girls and sports.
But,
that's what high schoolers want to talk about, and that's healthy. That's healthy.
Yeah, and there's just one thing that's been on my mind for a long time. It's so many times in your show, you always talk about the immorality of socialism and different social practices. But the thing is, people like free stuff, and the vast majority of the population of the United States, they want free stuff, and if a politician offers them free stuff, they'll take it. And so I think the vast majority of the population doesn't really care about the morality of socialism. And so how do you debate on the side of like pure capitalism? How do you propose that forward when everyone wants the free stuff?
Well, I think that the two things you have to do. One is you have to explain very clearly that there is no such thing as free stuff. That you're getting free stuff means it has to be stolen from somebody else. There is no such thing as a free lunch. There is no such thing as free stuff. Everything that you have has to be stolen from somebody. So what would you feel like, I would tell my opponent, if I want your stuff and I'm going to take your stuff because I want free stuff at your expense? So that's point number one. The second point, which is much harder but much more important, is that you get no satisfaction. There's a song, you can't get no satisfaction, something like that, from free stuff. Free stuff at the end is not life-enhancing. Indeed, it's life-destroying. Life is not about money. Life is not about material stuff. Life is about the process of making money. Life is about the process of creating stuff. Life is about the process of challenging yourself and working and being productive and thinking and engaging with the world in living your life. And to the extent that you just want free stuff, to that extent, you are defaulting on what it means to be alive. You're defaulting on what it means to be human, and you're defaulting on your ability to ultimately be happy and successful and flourishing as an individual human being. Earning is what matters, not getting. Earning, and it's what we need to teach our kids and what we don't teach our kids. Earn a dollar is 1,000 times more valuable than finding a dollar in the street. Earning a dollar is 1,000 times more valuable than winning the lottery. It's 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times more valuable than stealing it from somebody else. And that's what the welfare state is. It's just theft on a massive, massive scale. So you have to explain the morality, both of it as theft on the one side, and on the other side of the fact that it hurts you to be the thief. Because you then don't get to create, you don't get to gain self-esteem. And if you don't get to gain self-esteem, you can't be happy in the end. Now, admittedly, that is an idea that's very hard for a high school student to get because they don't have enough life experience to understand it. But it is such an important idea, you have to try. That makes sense?
Okay, thank you. And I have one more quick question.
Sure.
I know you're a huge proponent of Ayn Rand, and I've read The Fountainhead, I've read Atlas Shrugged, I've read Anthem, and I really love all three of those books.
Good.
And
what made you read the books? What
really
made you first read Ayn Rand?
Well, so in high school, like in freshman year for summer reading, we had to read Anthem, and I didn't really like it at the time. But then one day, just like a year later, I decided to pick up Anthem, and I just fell in love with it. And
Wow.
then I read Atlas Shrugged. I loved that even more. It's a little bit repetitive, but I still love the principles that it's talking about. And then The Fountainhead, that was I liked Atlas Shrugged better than The Fountainhead. But either way, I loved all three of her writings. But I have a little bit of I really love this philosophical stuff that she's trying to put forward. But the only problem is I can't find any other like philosophers or authors.
Well, have you read her nonfiction? There are no other philosophers. Have you read her nonfiction?
Yes, I have. Currently, I'm reading The Virtue of Selfishness.
Good. So read that, and then read Leonard Peikoff. He's got 3 books: The Ominous Parallels, Objectivism of the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and The Dim Hypothesis, DIM. And then read other objectivists. But there are no other philosophers other than her and Leonard. And, and Harry Binswanger has a book on epistemology. But read the objectivist literature, because you're not going to find anything like it anywhere. And when you go to college, they're going to try to convince you of everything, that everything is exact opposite of what you're reading right now.
Yeah, look, I guess one of the things is almost like a club among all the other philosophers, like John Stuart Mill, they like to write in like this fashion that makes it very boring to read.
Yep. So
all right,
yeah, so it's very hard. Good, great, wonderful hearing your story, and always love to hear how young people discover Ayn Rand, and love to have young people calling in the show. So thank you. I mean, you are my dream audience is high school and college kids, and I don't have a lot of listeners in that audience, so it's great to hear you being involved through the Q&A, because most of my audience are much older, unfortunately. Hi, this is going to be our last caller. You called before, 949, right? Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold, and I'm going to take this other caller. I think we've got this other caller. Let me see. Hi, you're on the Yaron Book Show. Who's this?
Hello.
Hi.
This is Logan.
Hey, Logan.
Hey, so since we're talking about race a little bit today, I want to throw back to a recent episode you did when you were talking about the opioid epidemic.
Yes.
And you had said something about there was some sort of inherent racism in it because the crack epidemic wasn't treated the same way.
Yeah, I backtracked on that. I don't know if you heard the episode where I backtracked on that one.
Oh, okay. Well, my thought initially on hearing that was that the biggest difference is that the opioids are the FDA-approved taxable form of the drug, and on the other hand, crack isn't. So that's why they treated it more harshly. I didn't think it had anything to do with.
It's part of it. It's also that opioids are downers, so you tend not to commit crimes in opioids, and crack is an upper, so is methamphetamines are uppers. But I still think there's something to what I said, but I don't have the data to prove it, so I'm backtracking from it right now, and I'll get back to the issue when I have more data to back myself up. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
But I think you're right. The fact that it's a prescription drug, or at least in one form, of course, the opioid epidemic is not just opioid. It's not just prescription drugs. It's also heroin. There's a huge part of this crisis is a heroin crisis. All right, great.
Right.
Thanks for calling, and thanks for calling me on this. A number of people have called me on this now, and yes, I did admit that I made a mistake. I've done it a couple of times, and a few times in my life. All right, we basically were out of time. I had 3 other stories I wanted to cover. One of them actually, I was going to say something positive about the Trump administration, but what the hell? Who needs that? So we're gonna end it here. Thank you all for listening. We will cover this. This is a Community Reinvestment Act story. I'll try to cover that on the next show. Probably do a show tomorrow at about the same time, another short one. And great, I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place. You've been listening to Yaron Book Show. And don't forget, if you find value in what I do, go support me on Patreon. And also share. Expose other people to these ideas and to these shows. Appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. And I will catch you all tomorrow.